failure, the great purifier. That stems from failure rule number one, which is failure purifies. It's the idea that the phoenix must burn to emerge. I think what I learned through a lot of these failures was they were kind of necessary, crucibles of reinvention. Whereas prior to certain failures, I might have had a real siloed view of my own skill set, a siloed view of what I could do in the world, and a siloed view of my own kind of flexibility in the world. But I am saying that if you're doing difficult, unorthodox, meaningful things in the world, chances are that more failures are going to travel on that path than other paths. So you better learn how to metabolize it, leverage it, anticipate it, and optimize it.
Guys, help me welcome the one and only Andy Thorp King. Dude, what is going on, man?
How you doing, brother? Thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, man. It's excited to talk to you, dude. Fellow failure overcomer, gonna, get gritty with it kind of thing. I'm excited about it, dude.
That's right.
Yeah, man. So I'm curious. All right. So you've been super successful in fintech. You've had some bestsellers. You've done a lot of really cool things already. What made you decide to really dig hardcore into this concept or this position of failure in general? What's missing from the marketplace?
Yeah. So, I was taking this beach walk in 2013. So it took me about 7 years to write this book. But the genesis was on this beach walk. And I was walking through a business divorce. So I had these twin failures kind of hanging over my head. This business divorce where I had to exit from my partnership in an online lending firm caused me to have to rethink my financial life, my pursuits, and how I was going to reorganize that whole tapestry. And I was on what I knew to be the precipice of a marital divorce at that point. And I was thinking about all this kind of what I would say would be, off-road entrepreneurial adventuring that I had gone down in my 20s and my 30s. So, everything from owning a gym to starting record labels to, this online lending business and other things that I've done as a creative, being a bodybuilder, things like that, writing a spy novel. And I was thinking about all the kind of lessons I've learned from taking unorthodox paths and failures, right? And I was thinking of the Winston Churchill quote, success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. I was listening to punk rock because I'm a big punk rocker. I was listening to, Lemmy from Motorhead, Ace of Spades. I was listening to the Cro-Mags, Hard Times, singer for the Cro-Mags, John Joseph, who's a triathlete, frequent Joe Rogan guest. He wrote the foreword to the book. And I just became convicted that I had to write a book on the value of failure because I felt like I had learned some things and I wanted to estimate them and write them down. And that's where the journey began.
No, that's awesome. It's crazy to me because as I was making my way through the work, right, it was interesting that it almost leads like a laws playbook. Like it's a failure law, like do this, right? Don't do this. Like, and I think that's kind of it's an interesting pivot that I haven't seen anybody else do. Like I've seen people talk about failure and the importance of, applying it to your life and the importance of getting comfortable with it, stuff like that. Whereas you go the extra mile and you're like, hey, no, I want you to do this, like do this one thing first and then let the other thing build on it. In fact, one of the things that I loved about the book specifically is failure is the great purifier. Talk to me about how failure is the purifier from your own words. I mean, obviously we want to encourage the audience to grab the book and kind of read it for themselves, but I want to hear it from you.
Sure. I'll hold the book up just for your audience to see. Again, the book we're talking about is Failure Rules with an exclamation point, the 5 rules of failure for entrepreneurs, creatives, and authentics. My name is Andrew Thorp King. So failure, the great purifier. That stems from failure rule number one, which is failure purifies. It's the idea that the phoenix must burn to emerge. I think what I learned through a lot of these failures was they were kind of necessary, crucibles of reinvention. Whereas prior to certain failures, I might have had a real siloed view of my own skill set, a siloed view of what I could do in the world, and a siloed view of my own kind of flexibility in the world. Whereas these failures often, even though they were uninvited, unintended, still kind of wished I could have avoided them. But in the end, as I stepped outside of my emotional participation in them and looked at them from kind of an outside observer, objective observer lens, I realized that they were burning off things from me. They were burning off waste, accumulated, faulty ways of thinking, faulty foundations. Old thinking had to die, new thinking had to emerge. And that's a painful process. It's just kind of like, the caterpillar to the butterfly kind of thing, and it was in these moments where I really learned over time to take the energy of the chaos of my failure events, and instead of seeing it as an oncoming head-on threat, but to take it and step aside, shape it a little bit, use it to my advantage, figure out how it could bring me into a new version of myself that expanded my existing identity out into new identities, figure out ways it could forged me into a new lens of my portfolio of pursuits. And it really has been just a huge mechanism for growth. I mean, along the lines of the seem to leave and the anti-fragile concept of, sometimes, that harm actually makes you grow. You don't just get up. You're not just resilient. You don't just restore. You actually grow exponentially because of the harm. Harm is actually can be good for you if you're that type of anti-fragile person. And that really was my experience. So it was this idea that, you want to avoid failure. This isn't failure porn. I'm not saying go take uncalculated risk and regret. But I am saying that you're doing difficult, unorthodox, meaningful things in the world. Chances are that more failures are going to travel on that path than other paths. So you better learn how to metabolize it, leverage it, anticipate it, and optimize it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I kind of agree with you. I think it's an interesting thing is if you're doing anything worthwhile, you're going to knock some stuff over by accident, period. Right. Sometimes because of limiting beliefs, sometimes because you're in your own way, sometimes it can be ego, sometimes it can be, hey, you're just in a bad deal. You partner with the wrong people. I mean, there's any number of reasons why, failure can show up. And the one thing that I've seen consistently with high performers is they do not use failure to stop them. They use them to slingshot them forward in all cases, and that's something that I've seen with your work specifically that you're very adamant about is making sure that people kind of surrender to that chaos, so to speak. So, if you're in the chaos, you're going to have to withstand it, go through it, go around it, go over it. You may as well just kind of lean into it and let it, kind of put it to work for you kind of thing. What's an example of maybe one of I know you mentioned obviously the marital, failure aspect and the business failure. What's another example of where you've used your own laws, if you will, or rules, if you will, to shape you that has now, created a better version of you today?
Yeah. So, I mean, this leans right into failure rule number 2, which is nothing is safe. So you talk about leaning into those failure events. And it's like, what's the alternative? To just resign to this safety file life where things are just anesthetized.
Or just give up, just throw the cards in the air. Yeah.
You might have some sort of mediocre, comfortable life, but you're not really breaking any bounds. You're not really doing anything new from an artistic standpoint, from an entrepreneurial standpoint. You're not trying to make impact on the world. So, I talk a lot about avoiding that in failure rule number 2, nothing is safe. The time of my life, just following, those two twin failures events, that business divorce and the marital divorce, once it finally came to fruition, I found myself at an inflection point where I was rearranging my entire work life dynamic. And all of a sudden I was, after being long married and long self-employed, I found myself living in a hotel room with no office to go to by day, no family to go home to by night. I was temporarily separated from my children. I could have wallowed in alcoholism or depression or self-doubt and all that, but I didn't. I invoked what I call the divinity of purpose, which I write about in the book a lot. And I was able to reimagine and reinvent myself with multiple threats. So in that failure space, that empty failure space, a lot of amazing things were born because of the vision I had. So I ended up using my skills in the online lending space to do some consulting work. That then led into partnering with some folks in a proper lead generation company that was very lucrative for a while. I also then used my skills in that space, the online lending world, to transition into a proper corporate job in fintech that has now been a long-standing career. I'm going on 10 years in that space as an executive. And that was quite a move because it was almost like, from a perception standpoint, that space versus corporate banking was almost like going from a porn star to a real actor. So that was a big deal. And then also I resurrected my record labels, ended up putting out some new record releases on my label, Sailor's Grave Records, awesome bands like Booze and Glory and The Creep Show. And then I also started writing failure rules and finished my first spy novel, all in that period. I was
gonna dip into the spy novel later. Yeah.
All these threads just started taking off. I used that space to expand myself. Yeah. Just say, what do I have? How can I use these? How can I build a portfolio of pursuits, which I talk a lot about, using Gene Simmons from Kiss as a primary example. Be an octopus, because if one tentacle gets severed, you have 7 more to keep you going. Yeah. That mindset that I just used, and it was real life, real example in my own journey.
No, I love it. And it's funny. It's interesting to me that most people don't know how successful an entrepreneur Gene Simmons is and how many things he has his hands in, unless they watch the old TV show. But no, that's awesome.
You read his book, Me Inc., and you're just blown away. And also his personal story, the stuff he went through from a failure kind of background with his family, his parents, going to Israel after it was reformed, I can't remember his parents or his grandparents dying in the Holocaust, his dad leaving when he was 7 years old. They had no toilet paper, no phone, no nothing. He had to become the man of the family very early on, was really birthed his entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, he goes through that in detail in his book. It's really amazing.
Yeah. I mean, I assume the creativity that he used to survive is the same creativity he used to build a business, or businesses, I should say. Yeah. No, I dig it. That's cool. I was just thinking too, we're at the time where you and I are doing this, this recording, whether they're listening live or whether they're, watching on YouTube or something later. It's interesting because we're in the process of what we went from the great resignation to the great layoff, right? You got all these folks that are getting laid off left and right. And my heart goes out to them. Don't get me wrong. But I think it's in those moments that you can truly redefine yourself. And one of the things that I find interesting is a lot of folks, when they lose a long-standing source of income, a job, a business, something like that, a lot of times people take that on the chin, like as an identity hit. How did you avoid getting it to take the identity hit?
That's the biggest lesson. Failure rule number 5 is you are not your failures. Detach from the optics of failure. And it's really about decoupling your identity from your failure events and not over-identifying with any one pursuit. Yeah, you softly identify with them because you want to put your all in it. You want to really become one with the pursuit. But have a portfolio pursuit. So you have kind of many manifestations of your talent stack out in the world, and just don't over-identify with either any one pursuit, any one occupation, any one skill set, and certainly don't identify with your failure events. They're just events that happen along your journey. Sure, they might have consequences or messiness. You have to clean up. You have to take ownership, right? You still have to own them and learn from them. But it really is about decoupling that identity. I think that is the biggest mistake so many people make, even like early on, before they're laid off or before there's a change, disruption in their life. They get in this mindset like, I am this. I am a mailman. I am a preacher. I'm a lunch lady, whatever it is. And they peg themselves this identity because we're almost trained as young people and throughout the system that we have to go after this one thing. And I just think it's very limiting and doesn't really map well to reality as reality plays itself out throughout life.
Yeah, no, that's so true. I am curious though, in reading your work, I know there's this one section, I want to say it's in rule number 3, that basically says, keep your attachments internal. So how does that a little bit different than, hey, don't get too attached to the external?
No, I mean, that's exactly what it is, right? So, I mean, I come from a framework from a faith standpoint of Christianity, but I also leverage from a subordinate standpoint, the non-attachment principles of Buddhism or some of the non-attachment ideas of non-faith expressions like Stoicism. I write about the Maharal of Prague in the book, who's the ancient, the Jewish mystic, and he talks about how we have to let the spiritual lead the physical. And one of the things that I honestly feel like I mastered is, gaining it all, losing it all, gaining it all, losing it all. That volatility, that kind of bipolar economic history has really made me so damn strong, and it's made me just fully detached from externals. Yeah, I live really well right now, but I'm always cognizant that if anything slipped away, if anything shifted and crumbled, my attachments are internal and eternal, right? So like I can adapt, I can call on that spiritual identity to help me form fit whatever circumstances come my way. I mean, it goes back to the Apostle Paul with, being content in all things, whether you're in jail or whether you're free, whether you're rich or whether you're poor. And I just embrace that entire ethos as I walk through life.
Well, I think, it's funny. Jesus even said that, make sure you're not storing all your wealth up and where it can be rusted and moss can eat it and stuff like that. And I think that kind of plays into that. You and I share a very similar story of having it all, losing it all a couple times and that kind of thing. And one of the things that I've realized is I'm very blessed. We live in a nice home. We're able to do some fun things. And obviously I have some toys, right?
Yeah, sure.
And it was probably 2 years ago. I thought, you know what? Business is getting hit at the moment because of supply chain issues, because one of my bigger businesses is a construction company, and supply chain issues, it's killing my margins, destroying my cash. So I need to sell my toys. And for the first time, I was like, you know what? They're toys. They're nice. I enjoy them. They're fun.
Yeah.
But I don't have to have them. Where earlier in my journey, it was like, hey, if I sold that car, or if I did this thing, or if I didn't go do this thing, what is everybody going to think about me?
Yep.
And I feel like a lot of freaking entrepreneurs, a lot of business owners, a lot of aspiring achievers, they get nailed in the face because they tie too much about what other people think about what their outcome's going to be, regardless, and we know that you're going to go through cycles. There's some days you're going to win, some days you're going to lose, some days you're going to barely get by, some days you're going to have abundance, right? But how do you act in that transition is, I think, is the ultimate definer, right?
Agreed. I mean, so like, for an example, like I love driving Cadillacs. I've been driving Cadillacs for about 10 years. I got a Cadillac tattoo on me, really.
Now you went the extra mile with a Cadillac tattoo.
Yeah. I do a Cadillac tattoo, and it's got the word hustle and scripted underneath and all of that. But if that got taken away tomorrow, I am not attached to it. Like if I didn't have the hot tub to smoke my cigars at night tomorrow, I'm not attached to it. Like, I'm prepared constantly for that shifting and for that crumbling to potentially come my way. And it goes back to this idea of trying to marry money and meaning, but making
money and meaning. I like that.
Marry money and meaning and go after them both in parallel, but love meaning, not money. Right. Yeah. So if you're loving meaning and not money, if the money and everything that comes with the money goes away and you still have a meaning attachment, which is internal, then you're going to be okay. But if you're attaching your meaning to your money and everything it brings, you're going to fall along with it. And it's having that mindset of detaching my money from meaning while still going after both. Yeah.
No, that's good. I was just thinking too, I find that I found this was a major shift for me. This is probably 10 years ago. Okay. My business was going good, but I wouldn't call it great. Right. Yeah. And that was one shift. I went from trying to make the business successful to simply it's just a shift, just a perspective shift to how can I position my business to serve the most people? The moment I did that, I started getting rewarded with more of the things that I was chasing.
That's right.
So I kind of surrendered to acting in accordance with service. And that service ended up giving me the reaping, so what you reap kind of principle. Have you seen that as well with your mentality and kind of how you built this failure rule mindset?
Yeah, you give what you get. I mean, if you cling to your life, you'll lose it. If you lose your life, you will cling it. I mean, all these principles carry out in a variety of different mechanisms within the world, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when you're focused on giving, honoring your paycheck or honoring those that bring you your revenue when you're an entrepreneur, if you're doing that, oftentimes you're going to see the fruit of that incrementally over time, more than just trying to protect. Trying to find a way to edge, right? If you're actually, thinking about what you're delivering and making sure it serves others, I think that is, that is to me the fuel that really keeps ethical capitalism going.
Yeah, I've always said that sometimes the most competitive edge you can have is sharpening somebody else's sword.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, because I don't know about you, but I ascribe to the 300, the Spartans, and the Vikings. In fact, I am apparently, according to my DNA, part Viking. So, which is kind of funny because I'm 5 foot nothing. So I don't know any short Vikings, but I'm apparently the first of them. And they used to make a big deal about making sure not only your axe is sharp, but also kind of like making sure your buddy's axe was sharp.
Yeah.
Like making sure nobody is going into a battle with a weapon that wasn't prepared, which is kind of, I kind of also think about the next biggest thing that one of the other things I picked up from the book, I want to say it's in rule 4. It's at one of the breakdowns. And it's this concept of the most valuable thing you have, which is the mind. So you call it, but you say it differently. They say, mind the fire inside. So that's a choice. How do you mind the fire inside, especially in moments of adversity?
Yeah. So, I go through a variety of examples on that, but I think the one that comes to mind most is, I think that might have derived from a quote from Srinivas Rao, who wrote The Art of Being Unmistakable, who's now become a friend actually, and is kind of helping me, coach me through kind of book launch and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, he talks about when he was, job hopping in the tech world, and I think he was in Silicon Valley, and he just had this numbness inside, and he'd be working on a project for 9 months, and then they pull the project from him before it's even done and scrap it, just felt this lack of meaning. But he had all the accoutrements that would look like a successful life. And he just talked about how, kind of taking that safe, practical way for him, the fire died inside. But when he started minding the fire, he did some radical things. He moved back in with his parents. He's got really into surfing. Kind of had this vision for his life that was different. He became a writer and a podcaster and a consultant, all these other things. He runs the Unmistakable Creative podcast today. And it's like all of a sudden that fire came up, but it's also an active thing, right? Because fire just doesn't maintain itself, right? Yeah. It's not just this thing that just happens all the time. You still have to mind it. So that means, if you have a day job, but you're building a dream on the side, you still got to put an hour or two every night.
Throw a log on the fire. Otherwise it becomes ash.
Regardless of how tired you are, right?
Yeah.
So it's still a minding process. It is, passion-oriented, fire-oriented, maybe in contrast to a low meaning, day job or something like that. But you got to find a way to isolate some time, even if it's nominal, and mine those fires to keep that going. And for me, I found, and I think others have found, that when you do that, it then shades every other area of your life, because you get so much joy out of even just a small amount of minding those fires of those things you're passionate about, potentially outside of your day job. That your day job becomes more meaningful, more enjoyable. It becomes what I call your enabler pursuit, that either finances or feeds into, or maybe there's a transference of skills from one to the other. And to me, I just think it's a very important thing to find something in your life that lights you up and mind that damn fire.
Dude, I love that. In fact, I love the fire analogy, because literally this entire time I'm like picturing a campfire. Like, you want to be warm by the fire, you want to cook marshmallows on it, you want to do all this kind of stuff, but if you just sit there and watch it for 3 or 4 hours, it's going to turn into basically ash. Every now and again, you're going to toss a log on it.
Yeah.
Or as you're kicking it off, you have to have enough accelerant, right, to get it going. Right.
That's right.
So, man, that's so good. I love that example.
Doesn't self-sustain. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I seriously do. The other thing I know that this is something I see in a lot of peak performers. And I know it's something that you and I share, which is this principle of do the hard work first. Do the thing you don't want to do right now, because that's probably the thing that's going to give you the most leverage to move forward. So talk to me a little bit about, kind of doing the hard things and kind of like making that a priority rather than something to run away from.
Well, I actually struggle with that, to be honest with you. Like, when I think about like writing the book, like the actual writing the book was just a pleasure for me. I don't have writer's block. That's not a problem. It just comes out. It's harder.
Yeah, there's a lot of content in there. You're going to have a highlighter for this book, but it's a great book to have a highlighter with.
Yeah, I mean, it just poured out. I mean, iterations over time refined it, and I think it really came out in a cohesive way. But, for me, it's more like, my kind of anchor quote for the year, now that I'm in the post-production phase of the book and just the marketing and trying to build an audience and build tentacles around it, is more, the devil is in the details, and so is the salvation. So the hard thing for me is getting into the details of mapping out this multi-year plan to try to evangelize failure wisdom to the world in many ways, right? So it's the details. And so, that's where it's the hard thing. That's where the discipline comes in for me. That's not the natural outpour. So, I mean, I'm in that now for many years as I try to build kind of an audience and a following around this message.
Yeah. I don't know if it'll help you at all. This is something that, again, was a shift for me when I started the same journey, right? This is 10 years ago that I started writing, speaking, doing events, and all that kind of stuff. And I'm very different now than I was then. Like as a person, as a personal brand, as an entrepreneur, all of that stuff. And I'm grateful for all of it, because it led me to where I'm at. I had this massive shift. When my feet hit the floor every morning, it's less about the strategy of building the organization and more about the strategy about touching hearts. Like, how many people can this resource thing touch? What is that? And I literally picture in my mind, like, a person that used to be me back in the day, like crying on a street corner or sitting on a curb crying because they lost this, or their relationship just crumbled, or their business is falling apart. And in this case, maybe their business falling apart because they don't know any better. They just did something stupid because they don't know any better. They've never been an entrepreneur before. They've never managed that kind of money before. Right. There's an innocence to it. Right. And that same kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, what happens? Would I feel lit up? Would I feel excited if I happen to come across that person and knew what they were facing, knowing that I have insights that could radically, I got a good friend right now who's probably in the process of declaring bankruptcy with one of his businesses. Okay. Sure. I'm sure at some point in time he's probably dealt with the identity thing. How does this make me look?
Yep.
Right?
Exactly. Yep.
When I told him, I said, dude, if you had any idea how many times I came this close to my businesses failing in building, 8, 9 figure, but like, if you had any idea how many times that happened, it would blow your mind. Because we like to, the Forbes and the Entrepreneur Magazine and the social media and all that's all this quote unquote sexy stuff, but it's not the real stuff. The real stuff is the sacrifice.
Yeah. I mean, I went through a bankruptcy, read about it in my book.
Yeah.
It was one of the most painful yet transformative events of my life. Yeah. And I learned to detach my identity from it. Right. Yeah. And that's a big lesson, and reinvent.
I'm glad you're bringing that up, because that's my next point is the importance and the process of reinvention. At least for me, anytime I've had to reinvent myself, it starts off with pain, then turns into purpose, and then turns into potential.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, it's the idea that growth usually comes from recurring cycles of death and renewal.
Yeah.
That's part of life. That's part of growth. If you're not constantly dying in some way and going through some sort of pain, metaphorically here, and then constantly renewing, the chances are your growth is probably limited.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that reinvention process. How would one person know, hey, maybe I'm at the early stages, or I'm in the middle, or I'm at the ending stages of a reinvention? How would you see that cycle?
Again, I mean, for me, it could be, self-directed, self-induced. If you have this kind of vision of changing your life, of, potentially
awareness,
disrupting your life, and you might be afraid to take the steps to do that, but you have this kind of like, this groaning inside to do that. It's mapping out that plan and finally taking, the first, second, third affordable steps to go towards that without fully disrupting. And it's the idea of balancing the chaos and order, right? If you have too much chaos, you can't function. Too much order, you're not growing, right? So you're getting stale. You need to invite some sort of chaos, stretching yourself, reinventing yourself. And you got to take those steps toward that. And sometimes, like I read about in the book, sometimes it's radically, induced externally in your life by events that happen outside of your control that you see as harm, that you see as bad, but that might, in the end, if you metabolize them wisely, be something that, in retrospect, could be the very event that reshaped you in a way that brought you to a successful point where you're more aligned with your calling journey and your authentic self later on. And they're the stories that I write about, in the book.
Yeah. And also makes me think about the biblical perspective of nothing is going to be misused, or nothing's not going to be used. Right. It's that whole, there's no bad. It's a transformative thing that's going to end up in your good. But I find that it only does that if you don't resist it.
You have to
resist it. You have to wait and wait and wait. And
I read about in the book, when you hit that rock, don't resist it, let it push you into a new stream, embrace that new stream, discover what that new stream is, or I think of like Jack Nicholson in The Departed when he's playing Frank Costello character, who's, based off the Irish gangster Whitey Bulger, when, he's like, I'm an artist. You give me anything, I'm out of it.
Yeah, that's right.
That's how I treat life. Whatever you give me, no matter how messy it looks, I'm going to get something out of it,
Yeah, no, that's good. It's funny. I was just thinking too, the book itself is like it's a straight up playbook for failure.
It is.
It covers such a wide gambit of different type of situations and different type of learning lessons and a playbook to kind of help you utilize it. And as I was going through it, I broke out my trusty highlighter, and I'm kind of like doing my thing and like, ooh, and because I like stuff like this. My family and my friends joke around, say, hey, dude, you always talking fortune cookies. They don't realize how many books I have to consume, right? I'm like, I get one-liners all the time. And I was getting to the point in the book that I saw a tagline that it kind of stuck out at me. I was like, ooh, I can't wait to ask him about this. All right, so I'm going to read it directly. It says, the thing one and the thing two dependency. Explain that to me, because I want to make sure I understand that clearly from your perspective.
Yeah. So the thing one and thing two dependency is failure rule number 4. It sounds like some stupid cat in the hat type thing, but it's not. I thought more of like Tony Soprano waking up, smoking the first cigar of the day in his disheveled white bathrobe and speaking in Italian American slang. And you got the thing one enabler over here and your thing two North Star dream over here. So your thing one is like an enabler pursuit, right? Okay. Your thing two is your North Star aspirational dream pursuit that you envision will align you most succinctly with your authentic calling journey, right? And so it's this idea that because nothing is safe, failure rule number 2, going after your dreams is also not safe. And you still want to avoid failure as much as is possible. I mean, that's a self-evident failure rule.
Yeah.
Well, you want to build some sort of scaffolding, some sort of plan in your life, even if you're going to have to iterate to help you more safely get to your North Star dream, because it's not safe, right? So I go through examples in the book. The most obvious one is bang down a 9-to-5 and side hustle your dream slowly, right? But there's all these creative ways to build a thing one enabler to get you to your thing two North Star dream. So, one of the examples I go through in the book are there was these 2 brothers that came over here from Lebanon, Shia Muslim, background. They wanted to start new businesses, in America. That was their thing to dream, but they didn't have any seed money. So they ended up getting a job with Disney on Ice, working in the merch truck, selling stuff to little girls as princess stuff, right?
Yeah.
But Disney on Ice took care of their lodging, took care of the food. So they had no expenses and they had no home. They were just married to the road, wherever I may roam, like the Metallica song, just living on the road for several years and just saved up all their cash with seed money. That was their thing one enabler. Very creative, very sacrificial. Came back and they started seeding their dreams. Now they own gas stations, nightclubs, cigar lounges, gyms, all in this one city. And they birthed that dream, right? It's this idea, you can't just quit your job all the time and just go right after your dream. You got to build a scaffolding. Another example of this guy, Chris Wren, has a record label, Bridge 9 Records. It's been around for almost 3 decades now. And he started his record label as a young kid in his 20s. He had no cash to put out these record releases. So he started a merchandise company called Yankees Suck and sold it to Red Sox fans. Made a bunch of money off that, pretty much threw good money after bad in some people's view, and underwrote his first 6, 7, 8 record releases. And that kind of birthed his dream. So he had an enabler pursuit and then he had his dream pursuit. And they worked hand in hand in tandem. And it's the idea of being creative about having these portfolio pursuits and having some enablers or a enabler, and maybe even having more than one kind of dream pursuit that work hand in hand. That's the idea.
No, I love it. In fact, it kind of reminds me. I had a conversation with my son. He was fresh out of. So I've got 3 kids. One was already working for one of my businesses. The other one, the other 2 boys, had graduated basically the same year in the middle of COVID, of course. So they're all over the place. One goes to college. One goes to college for about 3 months and says, "This is not for me." And I knew that going into it. I'm like, "Dude, you're an entrepreneur at heart. You don't know it yet. I can see it because I am one." Kind of think you just wait for it to shake out. I remember we had this conversation one afternoon. He's like, "Well, I just don't know what I'm supposed to do." And I said, "Dude, just go knock something over. Just go do something." And he's like, "Well, what? I don't know. But what if it's not the right thing?" I said, "No matter what you do, it's going to be the right thing that leads you to the thing you're supposed to do. So just go knock it over." And so I like the fact that you call it an enabler pursuit because, hindsight being 2020, he went into sales for a little while, did really well. Had met his current employer based on him selling a vehicle, right? To said employer. Now he's doing sales, but now he also has got an opinion of, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this sales stuff. That's a skill for me. I like people. That's a skill for me, right? I like this. He wants to kind of get into the SEO stuff and kind of business mindset. And I was like, hey, that's a good space. Just study your butt off, right? Because the difference between good SEO and bad SEO is how intelligent the person is, really. Because things change so fast. But it reminds me that where you are today, if you leverage it properly, will ultimately lead you where you want to go. So I also like the dichotomy of having the aspirational identity or the aspirational pursuit, because I think people think that because I'm not doing what I want to do or what my calling is in this moment, that it's never going to happen. And I think you and I both know that no, you just need to keep going.
That's right. And you got to find a way to organize your life that you leave some margin for time and energy. Again, even if nominally, but consistently, always returning it to mine that fire for that aspirational thing to pursue. You have to find time for that. You have to layer it in. And that's difficult to do because it means you're gonna be working on off hours or at night. Maybe on your lunch hour, you're making 3 or 4 calls, or you're sending emails. That's always been part of my life. I've always had, at least 2 to 3 pursuits running at one time, if not more. Right. So it's natural to me. I can't imagine just having one thing. I like being in disparate spaces that don't even make any sense to be hit.
I'm not a horizontal integration kind of guy.
That's okay too. I had that at one point in my life when I worked for record labels by day and ran my record labels at night. I mean, that was a great education in that space. But yeah, so 100%. I think if you were listening to what I call your eternal spirit voice at all times, you're going to find ways to align with the next best steps in your calling journey, no matter where you're at. And I think, to me, that's it's a spiritual thing. It's a self-awareness thing. It takes a lot of, intentional solitude to mine that. But it'll get you there.
No, it's good. I was actually thinking too, as we were kind of talking through that, when it comes to kind of setting all that up in your favor, and moving things around and shifting things, most Americans don't realize that the average American right now spends between 3 and 5 hours a day on media of some kind.
Social media, Netflix,
social media, Netflix, any of it. And I was thinking to myself, I'm like, shit, dude, that's 5 times 5 is 25 hours a week. And that's if you're just doing Monday through Friday.
Okay.
I'm like, what could I do with 25 hours a week? And I made a conscious decision. I'm going to eliminate all distractions except for this hour to this hour. Right. The only so my audience knows that, I am in my DMs from social media from time to time, but they're not going to see me answering every 5 minutes. I'm going to pop in there at 1 o'clock. I'm going to talk to a handful of people and pop back out. And then I'll do it again. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a time and a place for each one of those things. Cause I wanted to get 3 of those hours back a day, produce more content. We got a brand new program we're launching, Unstoppable Startup, in the near future. And I want to make sure the content's on point. So I have to commit. But if I was on my social media doing this all day long, like distracted all day long, you're going to lose that focus. So how important is focus?
There's also like, the idea of just delineating between active and passive media consumption, right? Like, when I have my media consumption, whatever it might be, I'm actively trying to consume it to generate ideas for my own output. Like I'm not just consuming it just for entertainment and pleasure. That might be a part of it, but whether it's listening to music or watching something, on Netflix or scrolling through Instagram, like I'm actively trying to generate ideas and make connections that can inform my own content and might map back to my book or whatever it might be, so that I can then put it out on my own Instagram or have it be part of, whatever else I'm working on.
Yeah. And the last thing I want to maybe hit while we have the time together. And of course, again, everybody go grab the book, check it out. It's definitely a highlighter book. You're going to love it for real. It's like if you're going to be a peak performer, you are going to deal with failure. So may as well get a roadmap for it. So that's how I look at it. Right.
That's right. Yep.
One of the ones I want to hit really fast is something that I think we all deal with. And we've been dealing with it since grade school, if not like preschool. And that is a spirit of rejection and dealing with rejection and how we use rejection or let it consume us. Like break down how we should be using rejection as far as when it comes to a failure rule.
Yeah. So, I use a quote from Sylvester Stallone in the book, the erudite Sylvester Stallone talks about how he just sees rejection like blowing a bugle in his ear just to wake him up and get going and after it harder. Right. And I think that's how I view it, right? And it also goes back to failure rule number 5. You are not your failure. So if you're rejected, it can be interpreted as a failure event, depending on the rejection. Like detach your identity from it, right?
Yeah.
Don't even like demonize, those who might have rejected you. They have their own reasons. Maybe they're wrong reasons, but it's just an event. Like just think of it objectively. Think about what you can learn from it. Delineate between what is true and what is not true about that rejection of you or your talent. And if there's something that actually points out a gap in you, go work on that gap and get better. If that rejection is really based on a false perception, reject that rejection. Go find another avenue for your skills and talents. Move on. But don't let it bog down your identity or slow you down.
No, I love it. In fact, I actually think that knowing who you are and your inside and your core is huge. And I actually use Sylvester Stallone because most people don't know his story, right? The dude, yes, he wrote Rocky. Yes, he starred in Rocky. Yes, it blew up and became a whole franchise, and that led him become an action star and all this kind of stuff. But what most people don't understand is prior to that, he was a failed actor. They didn't like the way he talked, or where Adrian, or the way his lip went up, or whatever. Couldn't get something going. Got so bad he had to sell his dog.
Yeah,
he had to sell his dog, Butkus, right? And he goes out, and from that standpoint, like, goes and creates one of the best works on the planet, one of the most inspirational things on the planet, because he knew who he was. And they offered him, I think it was like $350,000 to buy the script from him, provided he wasn't the actor. And he refused to sell it. He said, if I'm not the lead guy, you're not getting the script. Lo and behold, they gave him a small budget. He ends up becoming the leading actor in that and changes the game when it comes to inspiration movie.
100%.
Like, it just goes to show that, like, knowing where you are in the journey and knowing who you are and whose you are, dude. Oh, imagine if he had just given up. He's like, no, my dog is too important. My this is too important. That we would have no Rocky movies, no Creed, no Rocky, no Rambo. Like, you know what I'm saying?
I know. Yeah, and it goes back to, like, it's the juggling between money and meaning, right? He got offered more money to not be in it, but he chose meaning. And to him, he had this vision. He had to be in it. He just was convicted that was part of the plan, whatever we perceive the plan to be, right? And like that ended up manifesting and being the right path for him to pursue, even amidst, temporary, rejection of the higher payday.
Yeah, dude, I love it. Well, before we head out, I'm curious, where can everybody else find out more about you and about the book and kind of getting their own copy?
Yeah, so they go to andrewthorpking.com, no E on the end of Thorp. There you can find me on Instagram, get linked to that. My YouTube channel, I got some great produced videos that echo the themes in the book in a different way. Also, my merchandise company, Soul on Fire Supply Company, some kick-ass designs from some of my ethos of the book. It's also a soundtrack to the book because I love heavy music on Spotify and Apple Music, the Failure Rule soundtrack. And you get the book anywhere books are consumed online. Obviously, Amazon. There's an audiobook too, read by Jay Estang, who was an actor on Twin Peaks, the show.
Oh, cool.
He does a kick-ass job, like a really great cadence, good urgency. He was definitely did justice to the text. But yeah, AndrewThorpKing.com, no E in the end. It's a gateway to everything.
Dude, I dig it. Well, look, final thing here. We've been tiptoeing all over top of this entire conversation, which I'm pretty excited about. Because I believe redemption is reinvention. You had talked a lot about in the book about continually reinventing yourself. Like you can sketch your life or resketch your life almost as quickly as possible. Let's bring it home with that, because I want to make sure people understand that wherever they are today does not have to be where they stay. Yeah.
So there's a chapter in the book called, know that you can resketch your life every day or something to that effect. And I think the example I'd go through there is, the political pundit, Glenn Beck, how, he was, a really bad alcoholic. He was really, abusive to the people around him, suicidal and dabbling in cocaine and all this other stuff, lost his family, found himself living in his dingy apartment, but, really kind of in the end, kind of found his spirituality, found a good life, pivoted away from the optics of his reputation and found a way to resketch his life and become who he is today, regardless of what you think of him from a political standpoint. Just
for sure.
Study of him as a person, is that kind of idea that whatever your old reputation is, that can be renewed if you take responsibility for your actions of your past, but then travel away from them and reinvent yourself. Another example I go through is Elgin James in the book, who happens to be Jocko Willink's half brother. He was the leader of a violent, straight edge, hardcore punk rock street gang in the Boston area that went national. They were even featured on the Gangland episode on the History Channel. He ended up turning away from violence and pursuing what his calling journey in screenwriting. He ended up being successful in that, was a mentee of Robert Redford. He was the one who wrote Mayans MC on FX, the spinoff to Sons of Anarchy. And on the day of his sentencing for an extortion charge was the day he actually got offered a deal with Universal Pictures, kind of juxtaposed the old life and the new life in that day, right? But he was able to kind of shed that reputational garbage of the past and resketch his life and chase after his calling journey. So even if you have an ethical failure, we talk about these other failures and these other failures, but even if it's an ethical failure, you can be redeemed to renew. And I go through examples of that in the book as well.
Dude, it's been fire, man. Appreciate you coming on today, man. Did you have a good time?
Yeah, it was great. It's good to talk to you, man. Love it.
Rock on. All right, well, you take care. See you.
All right, see you.
I hope you liked that video. And if you did, make sure you check out this next video right here.
Part of the path of faith and part of the path of just being human is to find your way in this life and find a way to some kind of greater contribution or purpose